Good evening, everyone. All of you in Facebook world and Twitter world. My name is Angela Monson, and I am very happy to be the moderator for tonight's discussion, which is being hosted by Black Women Voices, an organization here in Oklahoma City that hosts monthly virtual series, creating a safe space for Black women to share their lived experiences, to educate and lead the community into action or self-reflection. Black Women Voices elevates the often silenced truths of Black local women by giving them a platform to feel empowered, supported, and heard. Black Women Voices seeks to bring structural and systemic racism to the light in order to create a more equal and just system of accountability for all. That was the elevator speech. I'd like to say Black Women Voice is an opportunity to empower Black women to speak and be heard. So I am so happy to be here with these wonderful panelists tonight, each of whom will have an opportunity to introduce themselves. You'll learn more about their lives and their history as we move further in tonight's discussion. And tonight's discussion is focused on Black women who paved the way in the fight against systemic and structural racism. I made a note earlier today that I have known these women on with us tonight for decades, and that's really true for all of them, multiple decades. We have lived history, they more so than I, and I'm just pleased to be a part of this wonderful evening. Let me say right away that the views and opinions expressed on this panel do not necessarily reflect the views and the opinions of Black Women Voices Project, nor its sponsors. And speaking of sponsors, I'm very happy to thank individuals who've made some contribution to ensuring that we're here tonight, including Blue Cross Blue Shield of Oklahoma, the Gooden Group, True Sky Credit Union, Boomershoot, and Metro Family Magazine. So thank you, sponsors, for providing this opportunity for these wonderful women to have a discussion. Hopefully, there's one panelist that's not with us, Lois Felder, and we hope that she'll be joining us pretty soon here, but we're gonna move on with the panelists that we have with us. And in no certain order, I'm just going to tell you who they are. Jana Harkins, Joyce A. Henderson, Marilyn Hildreth, Joyce Jackson, and hopefully Lois Felder will join us soon. So we're going to get right down to business. I'm going to check my notes because the young women, and they are young enough to be our daughters and maybe even granddaughters, have given me a nice script, and I want to make sure that I cover everything. I'm scheduled to remind the audience that disrespectful and inappropriate commentary will not be tolerated. We'll boot you out. I don't know how the technology works, but we'll boot you out. Any disparaging comments will be screenshotted and deleted from this platform. So I guess the Facebook police, no, I'm just joking, are somewhere around, but people are reviewing. So I think people who signed on tonight are people who are really interested and concerned, we hope, about the issues that will be discussed, and will engage in a dialogue at the appropriate time with our panelists that will be helpful. If anybody just so happens to feel compelled to want to support these activities and the work of Black Women Voices, feel free to do so. Your gift would be a tax-deductible contribution, and you can go to Black Women Voices in the additional comment section on this Facebook page or Twitter page, I'm sure, and find an opportunity to contribute. So I guess that's it for our commercials. So straight to our panelists. What I'm going to do by way of introduction, and I kind of hate introductions, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists. I hate to give introductions. I hate to be introduced because I want to make sure that you say, panelists, to our listening and viewing audience, the things that are important, that you believe are important, that they know about you, your work, your efforts, and your commitment to the struggle. And particularly today, when we had a historic announcement, when Vice President Joe Biden, the Democrat Party presidential nominee, had an opportunity to introduce his vice presidential pick, Ms. Kamala Harris. History was made today. And we don't want to forget that. The first African American, Indian American female to be selected and, not representing Black women voices, possibly our next vice president, made today. So my friends on with me, this is a historic day, not just because you're here, but because of other events that are happening around us. So the question I'm going to pose to each of you, that you can take 3, 4, 5 minutes or so to answer, is tell us a little about your background, whatever you want to share. And in sharing that background, please tell those who are with us tonight a little more about your personal experiences with systemic or structural racism. You might share a story that highlights some event, some occurrence that really tells a story. It happens all the time, and sometimes people don't even recognize what's happening. So share with us. Jana, you're up front, you're up top. I'm looking at you, so we're going to start with you.
Well, I was hoping to go last so I could see just exactly how much time I have. I'm Jana Lewis Harkins. For many of you, you know me as a Democratic Party activist. Currently, I am the state president for the Oklahoma Federation of Democratic Women, and I have a seat at the table for the Oklahoma Democratic Party as a member of their central committee. I can remember the days when there were no faces that looked like me on that committee. But I want to start by saying that in addition to, and more so than, I am a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and those things sometimes seem like they're not as important of all of the little things that are going on with the party and with all of these other things that I do. But foremost, this is what's important in my life. And I'm sure that all of you, I know Miss Henderson was talking about that she's been married over 50 years, and I am hopeful that I get to that place as well. A lot of people know me as the one half of the In the Know with Jana Lewis Harkins and Ronald Skip Kelly on the radio a few years ago. I can go into a department store, and probably every third or fourth time I go, someone says, "Are you Jana Lewis Harkins?" And, because I do have a distinctive voice. I started out on this journey of activism in the early 70s. I was a union member. Proud, I am a union activist to this day. I started out with the union. I rose through the ranks there, accomplishing many firsts. And then that led to me being involved in the Democratic Party. I will say one of the things that really influenced me was in 1976 when my mother turned on the TV. The Democratic National Convention was going on, and Barbara Jordan was delivering the keynote address. That was the first time. She was the first woman, and certainly the first Black woman to do that. And so that's what piqued my interest, because I really looked at that and I said, well, okay, they're not as racist as the unions are. Maybe I need to go over there. Little did I know. But when we talk about the systemic racism, that one of the things you always hear about Barbara Jordan making that speech, how she was a great orator. But what you don't really hear about is the fact that the reason that she was the keynote speaker is because she was on the radar to be Jimmy Carter's vice president. And that is significant with where we are today with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I have worked in many organizations within our community. And when I say our community, I'm talking about the African American community. I was the secretary for a number of years with the Coalition of Civic Leadership. I met Angie, not through the NAACP, which we both ended up there, but we shared office space with other organizations that we belonged to at the old post office. And at that time, I was the president of the A. Philip Randolph Institute. Another thing that I am very, very proud of, that kind of meshed my two loves, union activism and politics, primarily the Democratic Party. I also work with the ACLU. I'm currently on their board for the third time. The reason why I'm there is because of someone we all know and love, Hannah Atkins. Hannah was very much a civil libertarian. And when she decided that she was going to move on to other things, she said, you know, I cannot leave this place without a Black face. Will you do this for me? And so I agreed, and I'm better for it. I really have grown with the ACLU. So of course you all know me. I can go on and on and on about me. I can go on and on about the Democratic Party and the racism that we see happening every day. I can say that with the Oklahoma Democratic Party that we are quite diverse, that we have, through much effort, as I said, received a seat at the table, many of us.
And Jana, we're going to give you an opportunity to talk more about how that happened.
Okay.
In Oklahoma, and some of the things may be happening in the party or just politics generally that you know are, as I like to use, are deep-seated in some of this systemic and structural racism, because the struggle is still real. It's here.
It is.
So we appreciate all that you've done in your short life, because you know you and I are about the same age almost. So thank you, Jana. Joyce Henderson. And happy anniversary whenever that 54th anniversary rolls around. I couldn't, if I'm married today, I would not live long enough to be married 54 years.
It'll come back around July 8th, okay? But it is, I am extremely happy because of this historic day, sincerely. And you kind of want to think maybe being a part of the city and had something to do with what we are experiencing today. So I sincerely am proud to be a Black woman, to be a woman, and of course to be the sorority sister of Kamala Harris. But as I introduce myself, I consider myself an educator. And of course, I am a retired education administrator. And when I retired, 37 years in the field. But it did not mean that I stopped being an educator. As of today, I still find myself making every moment a teaching moment when the opportunity comes. I am, as stated by Jana, I am a wife, a mother, and a grandmother. I am especially proud of being an educator because one of my mentors, Clara Luper, was my teacher. And I can truly say that influence got me into education.
Hello?
And so not only was she my history teacher, I was able to be a history teacher. And to do a lot of the things that she taught us, I was able to pass them forward in my role as a teacher and, of course, as a high school principal, counselor, on and on. The experiences I had, though, add my involvement of the civil rights movement. I participated in the sit-ins. I was not one of the original 13, but I was a participant in the sit-in movement. And if you were Clara Luper's student, I don't think you had a choice to say, I don't want to be involved. She invited all of her students to join the NAACP Youth Council. That we did. What is important in my field of education, and I'll wrap this up, there was a time we did not have our schools integrated. There were times when you had no Black administrators. And I'm fortunate and honored to have that experience and to become principal at some of the schools that were segregated. So that makes me feel real good. But under Clara Luper's leadership, you learn a whole lot about history and making history. And opportunities I had going to Washington, D.C., August 28, 1963, to hear Dr. Martin Luther King deliver his I Have a Dream speech, priceless. Going back 50 years later to celebrate that event, priceless. Having the opportunity to go and witness not one, but both inaugurations of President Barack Obama, priceless. And I'm hoping maybe to go back. We are going back in January to witness another historic day. So at any rate, I wrap myself up by saying I'm part of the education world and part of the civil rights world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joyce. You mentioned an icon, not just here in Oklahoma, but we like to think across the country, if not the world, Miss Clara Luper. And
Sure.
Marilyn is here, her daughter, who was, I guess it's in her blood, in the womb, Marilyn, you learned how to be a civil rights activist and a businesswoman and a businesswoman. So your experiences are certainly unique to all of us. So by way of introduction, talk to us about who you are and whatever you want to share and some of your experiences. We're going to get back to some very specific questions. So no one get nervous. We'll get a chance to ask you a few additional questions. We have some time. So Miss Marilyn Hildreth, we are glad you joined us tonight, and it's your turn to share.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here. My life is very simple. I say it is. I don't know what others might say.
No.
I am, as you said, the daughter of Clara Luper, and I'm proud of that. God was very good to me. My story started at a little place at 616 Northeast 3rd Street here in Oklahoma City. When I grew up in Oklahoma City, Blacks could not live across 7th Street. Mm-hmm. So I went to I did attend all Black schools. And I'm proud of that fact. When I was young, my mother wrote a play, Brother President, and she taught school at Dunshee High School, which is in Spencer, Oklahoma. And Brother President was the story of Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. Herb Wright was in the audience and had the opportunity to watch the play. And he invited the students at Dundee in the play and us other participants to go to New York City and present the play.
Wow.
And that we did. The joy of it was, now that I think back, is that I think that mom did it intentionally, where she took us to New York City by way of the North. So we could experience some of the things that we had never experienced before. Because in Oklahoma, everything was colored this, colored bathrooms, white bathrooms, colored water fountains, white water fountains. So we went to New York City, and for the first time in our lives, we experienced something that we never thought about because we thought everything was like Oklahoma, colored and white. Harriet Tubman said a little bit of freedom is a dangerous thing. And that's what we experienced in New York City. We were able to go into a restaurant and drink a Coke or eat a sandwich. You don't know how important that is because in Oklahoma City, we couldn't even go, we could spend our money in downtown Oklahoma City, but we had to go to the back of the store outdoors, eat out of brown paper sack. And you know what? It's humiliating. You had to eat on the street. Some people compare it to the way it was set up, like dogs. No, when we came back from New York City, we came back by the way of the South. And then we had to face the age-old discrimination of segregation, bigotry, and hatred. Colored this, white this. And when we came back to Oklahoma City, we decided no more, America, do we want to experience what we've experienced. So the NAACP Youth Council, with mom as advisor, decided, well, I made the motion after arguing with my brother Calvin that we would go down to Cat's drugstore and we would sit and we would sit and we would sit. And that's what we did. And by doing that, we had other young people throughout this country that joined in the city. That if we had not started here in Oklahoma City, what we did. And Oklahoma City is unique, Angela, because the civil rights, the city has lasted over 6 years nonviolently, because we were trained in the passive nonviolent resistance. We were trained to turn the other cheek and treat people like we wanted others to treat us. So after being taught, I called it in the little army, we decided to keep protesting until the walls of segregation would come tumbling down. Many of us went to jail, and my friend Joyce up there decided to go somewhere else instead of go to jail. But many of us went to jail, and I want you to understand that we were hated by a lot of whites, and we were detested by a lot of blacks because they could not understand why we would try to change the system. But we continued to fight. And as you know, history will record that we were effective in what we did.
And that
And I
fight
want to tell you this.
continues.
One thing that I always think about, and I was listening to others, that after all the demonstrations and the the equal opportunities, I had an opportunity to go to work for an insurance company here in 1974. The first woman they ever hired. And my first day on the job, I was sharper than a tack. I was sharp. And I walked in with my head up and had my briefcase. You couldn't tell me nothing. I had Langston on my shoulders. I had Douglas High School, and I had the shepherd pride in my blood. And this white man walked up to me that worked there at the company I was going to work for. And he said, "Are you Marilyn Luper?" And I said, yes, I am. He said, why don't you go back home? We don't want you here. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't understand you. You don't even know me. Why is it you don't want me here on a job? He said, for several reasons. First of all, you're black. Second, you're a woman. And third, you're a looper. So that's my story.
Oh, that's a serious story, Marilyn. And we're going to come back to some of those issues in the workplace and that we know are not limited. You know, you made a comment, we're going to continue to fight. And that's our comment today. We continue to fight. We make strides. Kamala Harris, today, that's advancement. But I said it before, the struggle is real. And I don't think any of us can argue with how real that struggle is, particularly Joyce Jackson, who all of you are famous. All of you are famous women. Joyce, you're the only one of us who was routinely on TV. Jana's on the radio, but people saw your face. And so we know, like all of us, we've confronted this systemic and structural racism that Marilyn described and has been described before. But talk to us about your life, your experiences, highlight a story, an example, and we're going to come back and talk to you in a second more about the media. And you're muted, Joyce. No, you're not muted, but we can't hear you. Joyce, we still can't hear you. Can you hear me? Nod if you can. We can't hear you. Check your mute button. There you go. Thank you, Joyce. Now you're muted again. Joyce, if you can hear me, let's try it one more time. I can't hear you. Erica. Erica's our behind the scenes person. Joyce, we're going to put you on hold. Lois, I'm going to come back to you. Erica, if you can get to Joyce and see if you can get a little help for her sound. Lois, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. You heard kind of the setup for Joyce. I can hear you just fine. So set up for you, same thing. We're just introducing ourselves, telling a little story, a little background about some of your experiences for 4 or 5 minutes. And then we're going to circle back around with some specific questions about your real line of work. So Lois Felder Jones, you're on.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, right in the midst of it. And had 4 brothers. My dad died, I was 6 weeks old. And I can give credit to my brother in Detroit, Willie Felder, and my sister-in-law, because I had 2 children and was still going to make it. And they did a lot of work in keeping my kids and working with me, and he got me involved. Prior to that, he always saw that I was well kept and going to school. So we did that in Birmingham, Alabama. But a lot of people don't know, Rosa Parks was a seamstress. And in Birmingham, we had to wear blue uniform. And so my mom, they would buy blue bolts of cloth. And Mrs. Parks in Montgomery, Alabama, and a lady named Mrs. Hunt made our uniform. And sometimes she charged, sometimes she didn't. And so that's how we were able to go to school. And my brothers, they would go to Montgomery, and sometimes they would bring the stuff back, or Miss Hunt would go down and bring our uniforms back to Birmingham. Well, when the civil rights movement itself started, we had a department store called F.W. Woolworth. And so Mr. Johnson, who was the principal of our school, he followed us from grade school on through high school. That is Alma, Colin Powell's wife's father, and who was very gracious in helping us. But I'm going to skip through that. I just wanted you to know that little background from Birmingham, Alabama, and what we went through with the Ku Klux Klan and all of that. And so my brother got a promotion and he was in California. I went to New York and went to school there, and then got a promotion to go to offer to go to California. I called my brother and told him I had an ex job to go to California, and could I stay with them? And he says, "Come on, it sounds like a good deal." My sister-in-law says, "Come on, it sounds like a good deal." So me and my two kids, we packed up and we went to California, went to work at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital. We opened up a psychiatric unit there, and I worked there for a while. And then there was the labor union's daughter was one of our clients. And when she was discharged, he asked me if I would come to work for the union, which was Local 770 in California. And so when I talked to my director about it, she said, "That's an excellent opportunity for you. You need to go. I don't want to hold you back. You go." And so I went to work for Local 770, and we call it preventive medicine now. But when Joe Silver, who was the president, he called it predictive medicine. And so I went to work, and his daughter was a good friend, and I, worked with her. And so my career took off from there. Well, the Maxine Waters and Bishop Brookins, he was the minister at that time. He wasn't the bishop at First AME Church in California, and I was a member there. We went to work for Shirley Chisholm. She was running for president. And we worked on her campaign. Another young man named Ken Arduna. We all worked on her campaign. And there was a congressman was named Gus Harkins. He is the one who wrote the bill for Coretta Scott King for jobs. And so that bill was passed, and people began to get promotions and that kind of thing at that time. But it's a long story. I can't tell it all. It's a long story, so I'm going to skip over parts of it. But Maxine was a public relations person. And then we had Yvonne Brathwaite Burke ran for Congress. She became our congresswoman. And so she got pregnant. Didn't have no daycare anywhere for anybody. She introduced some legislation that in federal buildings, they will have daycare. And so that took off. They assigned me to go to various states for the federal buildings to try to open up some daycare. In our federal building downtown, I didn't open it up. I got a lady, and the federal government opened it up, and it was a daycare in that building. Well, you didn't have enough federal people to take their kids there, so they opened it up to people around. The telephone company was across the street. That's how PJ came in. PJ was a little baby. Dolores was taking care of him. That's his grandmother. She brought him over to the federal building, dropped him off in the daycare because we had to lease it out to somebody else. It was no longer federal. It was in the federal building, but it was leased out to somebody else. And so he was in that building. Dolores dropped him off in the building. She goes back across the street to get her tools because that was her building that she serviced. Before she could get back over there, that was the bomb. We were downtown at Feed the Children at a meeting. And when we heard the bombing, we said, "Oh, somebody done run over a gas line or something," never knowing that that's what it was. So PJ was the youngest kid in that daycare, and we didn't know whether he was going to live or die, but God saw fit. He just turned 21. So he's doing real well. And now fast forward again, how with Joyce Henderson. In 87, I began working around here because Jesse Jackson was going to run for president. This was in 1988. We came here, and he went to the paper for the what do you call it, Angie? At the Daily Oklahoman.
Mm-hmm. The Oklahoma Publishing
the editorial board. So we go to the editorial, but I'm talking real fast. We go to the editorial board, and we did that, and it went well. In the meantime, I had talked with the Oklahoma City University down there on 23rd, because they had the largest auditorium. And so we thought, well, we'll have Jesse there and invite the community in. So we go down there to meet with the president and two of the professors. And what they wanted, this is where systemic racism come in. They didn't want the community in. They wanted to sit there and ask Jesse questions. And no blacks were going to be there other than myself. And so I said, no, this won't work. This is too important. The community needs to know. The students need to know. So no, this won't work. So I said, oh Lord, I got him here. What we going to do now? So then I thought about Northeast High School. I called Joyce, and I said, Joyce, I got a thing. I got a deal for you. I said, that's right. How would you like to have Jesse Jackson at your school? And I said, in your largest area that you have, we can have in there the students, and then we can have community people to come in. Boy, Joyce was happy and excited about it. And so I sent him back to the, and I thank Reverend John Reed, and it was Reverend, that was the pastor of St. John at the time. He passed away. They all met with Jesse at the hotel. I'm over there with Joyce trying to work out the logistics of how we're going to get these folk into this building, and we're not going to get in trouble. And so Jesse came to Northeast, and it was the most beautiful thing you ever seen. There were parents there, there were students there, and the whole bit. And I imagine some of those kids now remember that as adults. And so we did that. And Joyce said, you asked her how did she pull that off. She never did tell her. But anyway, that was the thing for me with racism here.
And we're going to come back, because I know you have.
No, there's a long line of stuff. Janice, when I met Janice was working for the AT&T, wasn't it, Janice? AT&T, I think she was working. And so Mr. Les Brown, in the Skirvin Hotel, he was marching out there. The longest picket line you ever had was Mr. Les Brown. He called the union and wanted to help him. So I check in to the Skirvin Hotel and organized from within, and Mr. Les was picketing on the outside. That was with the Skirvin Hotel.
Lois, I know you have a lot of stories to tell.
I got a lot, so I can't tell it all.
You can't tell it all. We're going to run out of time.
I got a promotion to go, to Washington, D.C. And I was allowed to go to school, whatever state I was in, I could enroll in a class in that area. At that time, all of that was accepted, and you could get credit for it wherever you went. So I think I've been to college in every state in the union, wherever I went. And so they sent me to New Orleans when they were building the Superdome. To make sure that blacks got a fair share of jobs and things there. And it was Dutch Mariel. Mariel asked me if I would give him $500 and he could register people to vote, and he could become the mayor of New Orleans. His son was just a little bitty fella. He's now with the Urban League, but he was a little bitty fella at that time. So we got the $500, and I got some extra people to come in, and the rest is history.
And we know the rest of that story. And we know the rest of that story.
So
Lois,
I'm not going to talk about it anymore.
You guys got great stories. I just want to be fair to the other panelists. We'll get back around.
I just wanted to get Marilyn.
Living history is what we have right now. Those who are listening and viewing, this is to call your friends, so whatever you need to do, have people sign on, because there's more stories and more to be shared when we get to questions. Now, Joyce Jackson, I hope we worked out those little bugs so we can hear you now, because you got some important stuff to say. Still can't hear you. Still can't hear you, Joyce. Try it again. All right. Joyce, I don't know what's going on. We're going to keep working with you to make sure your computer audio is on and engaged. Or maybe even Erica could help you with the phone, because we still can't hear you, Joyce, and I apologize. We're going to keep working that. Somebody call Joyce. If you can hear me, Joyce, somebody's going to call you, see where we can figure it out on your end. We're going to transition to some questions real quickly here. Jana, I'm going to come back to you. I hate to do this, but Lois was making comments and getting ready to talk about the labor movement and your engagement, and you went from there to politics. You've been all around everywhere. So I just want to ask you, and you mentioned earlier about politics, because today's the day of politics. Lois probably helped it. Shirley Chisholm, Maxine Waters, Yvonne, all of these folk, and you're right in the midst of it right now. Let's talk about politics in Oklahoma, across the country, and the racism that exists. Clearly, Kamala Harris's selection as the vice presidential nominee is historical, and one that says, yes, things can change. But really, are things changing that much?
I would have to say that they are changing. But the reason that they are changing is because of our incredible number and dedicated, responsive, just busy young people. Mostly African American, but certainly other people, our allies, other young people of color. You know, the Young Democrats of America, their president is a young Black man from Oklahoma, Joshua Harris Teal. Last week, the Young Democrats of America elected 3 people. Well, they elected a couple, but they now have 3 African Americans on the national DNC. And that's an incredible feat. That's something that you only think about. That's a possibility. But I want to give credit to them because they are making significant strides, but they have the work cut out for them because, you know, there's only one pie, and that pie has to be divvied up. And people are still apprehensive about sharing. They want the whole pie. The same story that was going on when I got involved with the Democratic Party back in 1970, really 1978. You know, it's just one pie. So
Jana, do you?
Yes.
Let me ask you this real quick question. Because it's one pie and it's got to be split up and divvied, the rules, I presume, have to be changed to do that. And that's one of those systemic, structural kinds of issues. What is it going to take to make that kind of change?
Well, the only thing, and I'll use convention delegates as an example, where our convention starts next week. It's going to be historic. we elected close to 40 delegates here in Oklahoma. There are processes in place and targets for diversity. The only one that was actually achieved racial diversity was the African American delegation. As you know, our president or our chair here in Oklahoma is a Black woman, Alicia Andrews, out of Tulsa. So we did not meet our goal for Native American. We did not meet our goal for I believe, the Hispanic community as well. But there are strides being made, but it's very, very slow.
Well, you said it. Get involved. Get involved. Get involved. It's not going to happen magically. We have to work.
Right. We have to work it, and we have to be unified. We cannot. And until today, I would have said that the young people have not learned about the crab mentality. Mm. But I stand to be corrected, because all of the negativity since the announcement of Kamala Harris, it's just tragic. And a lot of that is coming from our young people of color. So the crab mentality and not understanding the history. So that's why I'm so happy that Black women voices are making these opportunities for us to share our history, because young people need to know.
They need to know, because
you say if history repeats itself if you don't know your history. Mm-hmm. And so it is so very, very important. Mm-hmm. And I look at these women and I have stories to tell and adventures and and the struggle has been real, but with the help of women like these on the panel and Ruby Moore and Delphia Harkins, mm-hmm. we have, it's like these people have staying power. They're not Johnny come latelys come and try to get their piece of the pie, and when they don't get it, they get mad. Staying power. That's what this panel has, and that's what the people, Miss Threed, she's gone. But, those people that we grew up with in the Democratic Party, Angie, on the Northeast side in what used to be Congressional District 6. Right. And I'm here to tell you we're going to get that 6th district back.
Thank you, Jana. The census counts.
That's right.
Oklahoma's count is only about 58%, national average, 63%. We cannot afford an undercount. Not now, not ever. Miss Henderson, Joyce, yes. Jana was talking about education and teaching and history. And there was a time when we thought, okay, education is a great equalizer. As long as we integrate schools, everything would be peachy keen and fair and honest. Well, we know that's not the case. It's still a struggle to make sure that Black kids and brown kids and kids who are who just come from areas and neighborhoods where the quality of education is poor, things are still unequal. So yes. Talk to us a minute about some of the system issues, structural issues that we have to fight to make sure that all of us have a fair and equitable opportunity to get that equity, as they say in education, that's necessary.
Yes. And when you start talking about education, you start looking back where we started from and where are we today. And as an educator, we are still discussing some of the same issues we had when I started teaching back in 1960. I started in 1968. So when you see that we're still discussing some of the same issues, we're not dealing with some of the same laws, but we're dealing with some practices, to me, that we need to concern ourselves with. We all are familiar with the Topeka versus the Board of Education. We are aware of here in Oklahoma City, the finger plan, the Dow versus the Board of Education. We've dealt with some issues to try to have that equality that you mentioned. However, when you are behind, it still takes you a while to catch up to where the other schools are. And I've always said, I'm glad we have integrated, but integration has been a blessing and a curse.
Mhm.
Why do I say that? Because we lost some things when we integrated with our kids. And when you start looking at it from that perspective, we still have a long way to go in order to get our children where they should be. I've always thought that if my school does not have what the school or schools have in other parts of the city, there's something wrong with that picture. And when you start looking at opportunities that my students may or may not have, then again, and they're unlike other parts of the city, something wrong with that picture. So as an educator, we are still trying to equalize education for all students. And we don't need to say that it's because of race. Now it's getting to be more of race have and have nots. So when you look at it from that, we have got to first understand the history of our schools. That's important to me, because if you understand, then it gives you some platform to see where we are now, so we can continue to move forward in what we're trying to do in the education world. You can have beautiful buildings, but the quality of education is important to me when it comes to our students. And when we integrated, we lost some of our dedicated teachers, our real caring teachers. And because of that, we've got to make sure that our students are not left behind because we don't have the caring that we need to make sure our students are on the same pace as all other students, not only in the school district, but in the state and in the nation. It's not just limited here with Oklahoma City Public Schools, where I was a part of, but it's limited. But we should be concerned with where our students measure all over the United States. So when I start looking at the educational world, we've had those who have fought real hard to have equality, even with pay, with our educators. I think about Emily Freeman. She filed a lawsuit because African American teachers were not paid the same as other teachers. So you've had some battles that we've had going on. And because we've had those battles, we cannot let that keep us from moving forward with the education that we need for our students. And so with that, I hope that kind of gives you an idea of, as an educator, we still have a long way to go to make sure all of our students have the same opportunities as everybody else.
That's absolutely right. And you and Jana said it different ways, but the same thing. The struggle continues, and we still have to fight.
That's correct.
Things like changes or discriminatory practices in salary and payment.
Yes.
We all applaud you for your ability to move up the ladder in administration in Oklahoma City Public Schools. But we know that having a diverse school board, having diversity in school buildings is imperative to really ensure that our kids get what they need. And it doesn't happen automatically. We have to continue to push and fight for that. I think Joyce is back.
Right.
We can hear her now, so I hope she can still hear us. Somebody wrote a note, said, "Tell your story, Angie. My story is not as fun as yours." But Joyce, you said something that I really wanted to make a comment on. In terms of systemic and structured racism. And I've always said my time in the legislature was 15 years in the state legislature. And people always want to say the government this and the government that, or business this or business that. And I used to always say, these entities don't live by themselves. They don't bleed. They don't breathe. All of these entities we want to describe really are made of us as individuals, of people. And when people bring to these institutions racist thoughts, hearts, minds, then it becomes a part of that system and that structure. And I had an opportunity to grow up, become president, first Oklahoman, first Black female of the National Conference of State Legislatures, see the world, engage in lots of things, the first assistant majority floor leader in the Oklahoma Senate, first woman, first African-American. But I'll never forget the one experience I had when I first became a senator. And there was I housed on the 5th floor, new senators and Republicans housed together. There was one member who I'd always see in the corridor, and I'd always speak to him, and he would never speak to me. He would look at me with only the two of us in the hallway. So it was not like he was mistaken. Of course, I was speaking to him, and I actually called him by name. So, when it was confirmed by another member that yes, not only was he a racist, that he was also a sexist, that it became clear that the bills and the things that he was introducing that I always knew were discriminatory, that would create this imbalance and this unfairness in state policy, were being done because in his mind and his heart, women and African Americans didn't belong there. So I say all of that, Marilyn, to lead into you, that we know for a fact that there are people who believe and view us as being less than. I mean, we're only a few generations away from slavery in this country. You lived a life, Marilyn, where racial discrimination was in your face. And I believe that some of those things still exist today. So I want your take. It exists. We know that. We have the Black Lives Matter movement. We have all these things, president and other things that make us know it's alive and well. But what do we do, Marilyn? What do you suggest? Do we go back to where we were? What are some of the kinds of things based on your experience in your life that we can share with others about how we really do make this transition occur?
We've come too far to turn around. We can't stop. We've made a lot of advancements. And a lot of times I would sit back and I would dream about the day that we would, as we say in the civil rights movement, would be free. And it's a question that is as old as time. And I don't believe that we will ever, I think people are taught to be racist. They're taught to be haters. They're taught to be disrespectful. And until we can change the hearts of Blacks and whites, I don't know how we do it, but I have a suggestion. You might not like it, but I would suggest if all Americans would go to sleep, and while they sleep, that somebody would run a test on them. Because the Constitution says that if you have a drop of Black blood in you, you Black. And when America will wake up, they would be so surprised because we're so mixed up as people that we're all very similar. We're all very similar, and we have a mixture of all kind of blood in our system. Look at us. It's 5 of us in 5 different colors. So I could change that bigotry in a minute. I don't know, some people might kill themselves to wake up and find out they were Black.
That's funny, man.
But that's my cure to racism.
Well, I tell you, and I'm going to pause. Joyce Jackson, who has been our media guru, is signed back off, still having a few technical difficulties. She may come back in. We're going to continue this discussion, but I'm going to ask that some of the, remind those that are listening in that post a question. We're looking at 4 questions, anything that you want to ask these wonderful women, these panelists who've lived our history. Make sure that you sign those questions on. We'll see them pop up on the comment section, and we'll make sure that we engage them. Lois, Felder, you were talking earlier today about Mr. Brown and his one-man picket line at the Skirvin Hotel, I think that your research tells us. And people have been, Black folk have been in unions, not always, but we're still there, sometimes a mainstay. But tell us a little about African Americans, Black folk in unions, and maybe some of the issues right now that we might be facing in terms of the labor movement and things that we might need to do. We need to exert ourselves within the organized labor movement to make sure that things are more equitable.
And at one time, the labor movement was just all white. And when we finished the civil rights movement and moved in, the unions knew that they had to do something different. And it was A. Philip Randolph, the sleeping car porters, who done an awful lot. And he went to the AFL-CIO and said, we've got to do something different. And we had a man out of California, his name was Bill Pollard. He was with the sleeping car porters. And A. Philip Randolph brought him to Washington, and he became the director of the Civil Rights Department for the AFL-CIO, and began to start workshops and recruit people in to the union into various areas. And the OIC started training. And so that's how Blacks began to get into the unions. Now we have to know that the unions created the middle class, because with the negotiations and the increase in salaries and trying to bring salaries up to equity with white folk, that's how that happened. Now with the teachers didn't even have a place to break. They didn't even have their own restroom. They didn't make the same monies that the white teachers made. Velma Hill was the president of the teachers union in New York and was a feisty little woman. That was Hill's wife, who was the executive director of the A. Philip Randolph Institute. And so that's how that came about. And they tried to get people to join the union, and people began to join. There was UAW with Walter Reuther. All of those were old civil rights people and who believed. And they were able to put the money where their mouth was, allowed me and Jana and others to travel all over the United States and the world to work with and educate our people about the union. Then when right to work came, people got confused. They just thought right to work, I have a right to work. They didn't know that it was busting up the unions. Here in Oklahoma, we had supermarkets galore, and people were in the union. CWA, you had the packing house. I came here several times to try to get some of the whites to retire because they had been there a long time, and we were trying to make sure some of the blacks still had jobs. Well, what we found out that these guys were people from farm, and they couldn't make a living because couldn't make the farm go. Said, I'd like to retire, but I can't. And then the Scobie boys, one of them became the president of the laborers union and built that building over there off of 24th, I believe it is, back up in there, the laborers union hall. Leon Scobie built that building. His brother was the president of Wilson Packing, the meat cutters union. And so we had guys everywhere. Jana was the president of CWA, became president of CWA, and did a beautiful job there. We had Freddie Williams, who was an advocate labor person. She believed in it. And when they tore down the place there on Martin Luther King, where it was a park, and the man didn't want blacks in the park, so he closed the park down rather than have blacks go over there and participate and ride in the park. Well, the building was there and dilapidated, looked like I don't know what. Fred Williams introduced legislation to put Metrotech there. And that's how you got Metrotech, was because of the legislation of Freddie Williams. She and Angie served there together. And but we got to get unions back. We got to be able to do that so that somebody will be able to monitor and make sure that people have decent salaries and get our middle class back, because we're losing our middle class. We're losing it. And teachers are not being paid what they are worth.
The value of organized.
So I say get the unions back and get people who want to work contract.
The value of organized labor. We have to work for it. And if somebody's confused, I actually served on legislative staff during the time that Freddie Williams was a member of the state House of Representatives. So, Joyce Jackson, you're back. Yay.
Yes, can you hear me?
I hear you, yes. You have the floor. No introductions, no leaders. The floor is yours.
Well, just to start out, I started working in the, you can hear me? Am I coming off too loud?
Yes. No, you're fine.
All right. Well, I started in the television business in 1970. And it was really because I was working at OIC. And I don't know if people are familiar with OIC, Opportunities Industrialization Center. And at the time, my boss wanted me to call one of the television stations to get them involved with OIC and to help us get jobs and help us train people, because that's what OIC did, is train people. And so I did that, and I kept asking her, what station should I call? And she said, your favorite station. And I said, my favorite station was the station with Ho-Ho the Clown and Pokey the Puppet. And that was on the ABC KOCO TV, Channel 5. And when I did that, I got in touch with John Harrison, who happens to be, at the time, he was the vice president of the station. And he was the one that talked my boss, really, into getting me to apply at the television station. At the time, being 1970, you know, there were a couple of blacks on television, but they were on network. And so I applied at Channel 5 because John Harrison wanted me to, and I had not, matter of fact, I had dropped out of college working at OIC and started to work there. And the first day that I was really on the job full time, the president of the station called me into his office and to talk about racism. He called me into his office, and I was wearing an afro at the time. And he said that he wanted to talk to me about my hair, that he didn't want me to offend anyone with my hair because I looked too militant. And I had quite a large afro at the time, which was a product of, I don't know if people remember Richard Lewis, who owned the Soul Boutique, because I had worked for him also. Okay. And so I sat for a couple of seconds and thought about it. And I told him, no, I don't think I'm going to change my hairdo or cut my hair or anything. Matter of fact, I already had a job. I was still working at OIC. And so I really didn't need their job. So a couple of seconds later, he said to me, welcome to Channel 5, Miss Jackson. And when I left his office, I went straight to my new boss's office, and I explained to him that I really didn't like being called into his office to talk about my hair. And I didn't expect that to happen because I had a job. And if they didn't want me out there, I could always go back to OIC. And my boss said, Ms. Jackson, you'll never hear it again. Of course, I got the phone calls from once I got on the air, lots of phone calls from people saying, why do you have that blankety blank on the air? And I went through a lot of changes there at the station. I stayed at the television station for like 12 years. And then I got offered a couple of opportunities to go to network, but I decided I didn't want to go to network because at the time I was married and had 3 kids. They were in school and I didn't want to take them out of school. And my husband at that time was an attorney. And so we didn't want to have him to take the bar, pass the bar again, do all of that stuff. Matter of fact, I really didn't want to go. So I turned down 2 opportunities to go to network while I was working at Channel 5. But Channel 5, my boss encouraged me to go back to school. And after I was on the air with 3 different talk shows, the Now Generation, Saturday Review, and ultimately Black Review. And that was after I encouraged the station to hire Ben Tipton. And Ben Tipton came in and started doing Black Review. And from there, he went to network. Very good friend of mine. But Ben Tipton was the one who kind of encouraged me to stay in the television business because, like I said, I had not completed my college education. And between Ben and my boss at Channel 5, they encouraged me to go ahead and get back in school. And so I got my broadcast communications degree at Central State University. And
now University of Central Oklahoma.
Pardon me?
University of Central Oklahoma.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And when I encountered lots of racism there at the station. First, they had no other Blacks at the station when I got hired except the janitor. An interesting thing, the janitor, that was when television went off at midnight. And so the janitor was the one that gave the prayer on television at midnight when the television went off the air. He ultimately became one of my best friends there. But I had some soldiers that watched out for me at all times. And besides my boss at Channel 5, Ida Blackburn, who was known as Ida B. She was the star of Oklahoma's television. And for some reason, I think people thought we wouldn't get along, and we did. And she treated me as if I was one of her children. Ida used to be a school teacher also. And so she was always watching out for me, especially when people would come to the station and would ask me to go to their cars and bring their equipment in because they thought I was one of the janitors at the station. So there's lots of stories I could tell you about.
Joyce, I do want to ask you a question though, and then we've got a couple of questions from people who are watching. At least a couple, but they're really kind of related. I'll ask in a sec. We see a lot of Black faces on TV now, particularly like say network. One, for those who may not realize, is an Oklahoma native, Blaine Alexander, who's on NBC News, Robert and Anita's daughter. And every time I see her, I'm just so proud of her. And as I watch another NBC station sometimes in the morning, all of the faces are Black faces. So we know there have been strides made on at least that side of the camera.
Right.
But are things really as good as they seem? I know maybe you're not in it as much as you were before, but what's your take about particularly the national media in terms of systemic or structured racism? Are we truly represented? Are our voices really being heard?
We are just now being represented. For years, we were not, because Max Robinson was the first African American to go on network television, and he was on ABC News. I'm sure some of you remember Max.
Yes.
And you're absolutely right. It's wonderful to see all the Black faces, but there are a lot of subtleties, and you don't see them as much as they used to be. It used to be that all the crime stories had Black faces, and all of the crime stories that were not a Black person, you may not see their name at all, or hear see their photo, or hear their name, for that matter. The word Black used to be repeated anytime there was something negative. So there were a lot of subtleties, and in some cases it was pretty blatant, the racism. But now it's the power behind the camera. And so whenever I talk to people about getting into the business, I said I love the business once I got into it. And I'm still a member of the National Association of Black Journalists, and that was started by Max Robinson. But the power in any broadcast medium is behind the camera. And we are just now beginning to purchase and be in control of who's doing what, and in management position, decision-making positions. And with all the social media, people are creating their own vehicles, their own documentaries, the podcasts. All of those things are putting more voices, more people of color out there in the medium. And Black media needs support even today. Even with all of the vehicles that are available, the Black media does not get the same type of support that the other media, but we are the ones in the Black media that still tell the stories about what happens in our particular communities. So there is still quite a bit of racism. Is just not as blatant as it used to be. And I applaud Miss Alexander. She does a wonderful job. But there are still some problems. Matter of fact, it was J.C. Watts just opened up another Black medium in the media with his all Black network. I haven't had an opportunity to see it because I don't know if it's broadcast in this area because it's located in DC, but it's supposed to go worldwide like everything else.
Not yet in our area. We're waiting, but not yet in our area.
Right. But here we have the newspapers. The Black newspapers, of course, are the voice of our community. And has been the voice for years. The real stories about what goes on in our communities come through the Black newspapers. I was a fan of the Black Dispatch. And I too, like Joyce, Henderson, and Marilyn, I'm one of Miss Luper's kids because I was a member of the sit-in movement. And also was a member of the NAACP youth group because Ms. Luper was my history teacher out to Dungey. Even though I graduated from Douglas ultimately, but I was there in Dungey when Ms. Luper started the sit-in movement. And I stayed with the movement through the sanitation march for several years. And I was one of those people that got an opportunity to go to jail.
I got an opportunity. The opportunity that the other folks did not take. Yeah, I'm going to
Yes.
encourage those young people. I'm looking at these comments and they're talking, ladies. You need to hear this. They're speaking about your history and people feel bad about what you experienced. But of course, we're all glad that you did, because the changes that we now are living would not have occurred had you not lived them. Joyce, I'm glad you mentioned the Black press, because I'm going to get a plug in here for
Yes.
the Oklahoma City Herald.
Yes.
We're going to have our 20th anniversary. I serve as managing editor, true disclaimer. So for 20 years, we try to report things about and for us that are in positive light, that encourage us to do the right thing. Speaking of the right thing, I want to ask this question. Jen, I'm going to ask it of you and other panelists. If you want to weigh in, please feel free to do so. I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to ask that you keep your responses about a minute and a half or so we can get off in time. But the question has been asked, and I think it's a really important question maybe to end on, about how we can ensure that changes occur, changes in in the landscape for people of color and in our communities, in jobs, in public offices, and in education, in labor unions, all of these things. How can we make sure that changes occur? This one person says, we know that the vote really can change things. Another person says that, we know how important the vote is to get rid of predatory laws and to make sure things happen better. But what else can we do? So, Jana, starting with you, if you want to reiterate the importance of the vote, I would appreciate that. But what can we do in addition to voting to make sure that these kinds of changes in the landscape of the lives that we all live can happen?
Well, first, certainly voting is very important, but I want to emphasize that the closer an elected official lives to you, the more impact you have on that elected official, and that elected official impacts you the most. So it is so very important for me, and I'm speaking as the Democratic Party, not as Black Women's Voices, that we elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
All right, thank you.
It is also important that we support our legislators. You know, we've got 2 African-American candidates for the U.S. Congress right here in Oklahoma. District 1 in Tulsa, District 2 down in Southeast Oklahoma. 2 very qualified individuals. We need to help them in many ways, but especially we want to give them their donations. They need donations. And then we've got elections going on at the county level. In Tulsa, they're voting next week for a mayor, young Black man running for mayor up there. So we need to get involved in these local races. That's how we impact change. We impact change at home at the local level. Now, one of the other ways too, and I'll tie this into why I was holding my hand up, was first of all, Shades Magazine is another media here in Oklahoma, Miss Joyce Jackson. But I mentioned earlier that I was on the radio, but our panelist, Miss Lois Felder, when I met her back in the 80s, she owned radio stations in Texas, of all places. But it's all about the economic empowerment. Someone turned her onto that. We have got to stay connected, and that's the beauty of, everything, every cloud has a silver lining. Zoom and these type of broadcasts and being connected been an outgrowth of the pandemic that has been good. We need to stay connected. We need to educate our young people. We need to empower them economically. We need to have more forums about how to invest and how to save. And for some, how to even open and keep a bank account. So those are ways that we can all work together for the betterment of us collectively and individually.
And Jaleesa, who asked the question about what can we do, hold elected officials accountable, hold people
Yes.
in positions of power accountable, call them out, write letters, do all that you can to make sure we out them when people are not doing things that are proper, and that we give them kudos when they are. Ms. Henderson, just real briefly,
Yes.
Joyce, education, just in one sentence or two, what do you suggest we do to make these kind of changes happen?
Well, the one thing you always want to make sure your parents are involved in their schools. And if parents are not involved, many things can go undone. So that would be the first thing. And it's also important for the communities to adopt schools. And we have to admit, you don't have a lot of money that's out there for the different schools. So you look at other ways to pull in those financial resources. And we know it takes money to do many things. But in order for your schools to really blossom, and the ones that I am aware you find they are doing and making real progress, they have strong parent involvement. They also have strong partnership with the community. And with those two things, you can go a lot further than just depending on the system itself. Okay.
Thank you, Joyce. I'm going to throw a new question out that popped up in terms of criminal justice reform for our last three panelists. You can respond to that question. You can respond to the question about generically, but we know we're overrepresented in the criminal justice system. 805, there are other things that are going on in our community that we need to be aware of. I'm going to ask our viewers to make sure you read these comments because they're great. Marilyn, what do you think? What are some thoughts about last moment thoughts about how we make change really happen? How do we get rid of this structured and systemic racism that we know still exists?
I think it's very basic. First of all, going back to what we said earlier in this broadcast, unless we know where we've been, we don't know where we're going. And unless our kids and grandkids understand our history, the changes have to come through them. It would do no good for us to change all these laws if they are not going to respect them. Okay, I think that we're going to have to teach our kids how to go home, interview their grandparents so they can better understand the struggle and their parents. And we're going to have to teach our kids what we want to know. They learn their Black history from us, which can help change the justice system. They must know about the Constitution. They must know their rights, but they must know how to act and how to react.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Marilyn. Joyce J. and Lois, you guys got about a minute, no more than. I'm going to time you. Closing comments. Joyce?
Well, I agree with Marilyn. It's all about education, and it's all about knowing what's going on in the community. And criminal justice has a major impact on our community. There are way too many people locked up. The right to vote when they have served their time is something that's quite important, and people need to be aware and find out what needs to be done. Laws have been passed, but still people don't know that they can get out and vote to make a difference. I would say the education about the criminal justice system and helping with the reform. There's so many issues, bail reform, and there's just a list of issues that we need to tackle.
That's absolutely right. State question 805. If any viewer is not paid attention to it, read it, pay attention, make sure you vote. Make sure you vote. Lois, you got 30 seconds. That's a test. Well,
okay, in my 30 seconds, one of the things is to communicate with your elected officials. And whatever you like or don't like, be honest with them about it and hold them accountable. The other thing is with our schools, I think we need to renovate and rejuvenate our PTAs and have it at a time where parents can come because they work, and do workshops with them so that they will know, so that our kids will know how to act. Our kids don't know because parents don't know. And this is a different generation of children that are in school now and their parents. And so we got to train the parent and train the child. So I think that's what we need to do. We need to really hold the school board and those folk accountable and rejuvenate the PTA and train them. And those of us who've been there and done that need to get in there, get in the trenches and help them.
That's right. Thank you, Lois. Thank you all. My heartfelt thank you to the panelists, to the organizers of this event. I think you are all wonderful. You've given great history. Read, if I could suggest anything to our viewers, read The Invisible Man. Ralph Ellison's story about Oklahoma. Some of the stories we heard today are mentioned in that book. Read current stuff. Inform yourselves. Be informed. Listen to multiple sources. Don't believe that everything on the internet is true, other than tonight's panel and everything that's been said. But make sure, young people, that the source of your information is important. Again, I just want to say thank you to Black Women Voices, the organizers, Erica, who's been behind the scene, Bailey and Shantae, and everybody who's a part of Black Women Voices for establishing this forum. And for those of you who want to hear more, make sure you sign in on September 9th, 6 o'clock again. There will be, the topic that day will be Black Women Voices in the Workplace. We don't want to miss that September 9th at 6 o'clock. Thanks again to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Oklahoma, to the Gooden Group, to True Sky Credit Union, to Boomer Shoot, to Metro Family Magazine, to Shades Magazine, the Oklahoma City Herald, to all of those media sources out there that are covering Black women in the Black community and telling us and showing us that we are a powerful people with a powerful voice. We will be heard. We will not be silenced. The struggle is real. And one of these days, if we continue to fight, the change that we all see, it will be. Again, thank you guys. I'm going to check my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. I don't think I have. We're just a few minutes over. Thank you all for listening. Make sure you read those comments on Facebook and on Twitter. You've done a fantastic job, and we'll be looking again to hear from Black women and their voices as they share things about the workplace September 9th. Bless you all. Yo, kudos to Kamala Harris and to Joe Biden. Good night, everyone.
Good night.